I still remember the smell that morning, the faint scent of dust and old wood, the kind that clings to forgotten rooms and buried memories. The house was silent, except for the slow ticking of the kitchen clock downstairs. I had come back after 20 years, not to remember, but to empty it, to finally sell the place that had haunted my dreams for decades. I thought I was ready. I was wrong. The drawer was small, hidden beneath a pile of yellowed linens in my mother's bedroom dresser. Its key had been missing since I was a child, or so she used to say. But that day, as I pulled the last sheet aside, I saw something glinting under the fabric, a rusted key tied with a faded red ribbon. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I knew what it opened before I even tried. The lock clicked easily, too easily for something untouched for so long. Inside lay a few folded papers, a dried white rose, and an envelope with my name written in her handwriting, the same delicate curves that once signed my report cards and grocery lists. For Emma, it said. That was all. No date. No explanation. I sat on the floor, the letter heavy in my hands. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart pounding like it wanted to escape. My mother had died 3 years earlier. We hadn't spoken for the last 5. The silence between us had turned into a kind of wound that never healed, no matter how many times I told myself it was her fault, not mine. But now, seeing that envelope, I felt something shift, guilt, curiosity, maybe fear. I opened it slowly. The paper crackled, fragile with age. Her handwriting was shaky but still precise. If you are reading this, Emma, it means I'm gone. There are things I never told you, not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I didn't know how to protect you any other way. I froze. Protect me? From what? You've always believed your father left us. That was the story I needed you to believe. But the truth is, he didn't leave. He was taken. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Taken? I felt my chest tighten, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My father had vanished when I was 9. One morning he was there, the next he was gone. No note, no goodbye. My mother had said he ran away, that he couldn't handle the pressure, that men like him always did. I had hated him for that. Built my whole life around that hatred. I could hear the rain beginning to fall outside, soft at first, then harder, like the house itself was remembering with me. I read the letter again, my hands shaking now. They made me promise to keep you safe, to never tell you. But lies have a way of eating the soul. I can't die with this one inside me. I didn't finish it. I couldn't. I folded it back and stared at the wall. My body felt cold. For 20 years I had carried her silence, her manipulation, believing I was the problem, that I was too difficult, too emotional, too much like him. And now she was telling me everything I'd ever known was built on a lie. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old room, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood, the wallpaper with faded blue stars, the crack near the window where I used to hide little secrets. The closet door that never fully closed. I could almost hear her voice, sharp and calm, saying things like, "You don't need to know everything, Emma." Some truths hurt more than lies. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear that letter apart. But deep down, beneath the anger, there was something else, a whisper, almost tender. What if she was telling the truth? The next morning, I went back to the drawer. There were other papers inside, old bills, a faded photograph of my parents at a lake I didn't recognize, and another envelope, this one addressed to someone named David. Do not deliver unless necessary. I hesitated. My father's name was David. I felt a strange pulse behind my eyes, like something old was waking up. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I took the envelope and turned it over. It wasn't sealed. Inside, there were 2 pages. One was a note, the other, a receipt from a hospital dated June 3, 1996, the week he disappeared. That was the moment I realized I had no idea who my mother really was. And I had no idea what she had done to keep me from finding out. I sat at the edge of the bed for hours, the letter open in my hands, the ink slightly smudged from the rainwater that had leaked through the cracked window. Outside, the world had turned grey, the kind of colour that sits between grief and revelation. I hadn't eaten since morning. My body was trembling with something I couldn't name: anger, confusion, maybe the beginning of truth trying to claw its way out of 20 years of lies. The hospital receipt was for Riverside Memorial, dated June 3, 1996. The name on it, David Whitmore. My father, room 312. Status, observation, restricted. I turned it over. On the back, my mother's handwriting again, smaller this time, almost like she didn't want anyone to read it. He asked about you. They said no visitors. I kept reading that line until the words stopped meaning anything. No visitors. My mother used to tell me he abandoned us, that he'd taken his car and driven away without looking back. But according to this, he'd been in a hospital, which meant he hadn't left. He'd been here, somewhere close. The sound of thunder shook the glass. I stood up, searching through the other papers in the drawer. There were dozens of envelopes, none of them opened, all with the same return address: Riverside Memorial Center, P.O. Box 8412. My pulse quickened. I tore one open. It was a letter, written in the same handwriting as the one I'd just read, but older, shaky, desperate. Asterisk June 19, 1997. Sometimes the smallest things, an old photo, a forgotten letter, can change everything we thought we knew. If this story is already making you feel something, stay with me. Don't scroll, don't leave, because what's coming next will break everything open. And if you believe some stories deserve to be heard, take a second to like this video and subscribe, so we can keep sharing the ones that remind us we're not alone in the silence. Mary, please. I don't understand why you won't bring her. They say I'm stable now. I just want to see her face, even once. She's my daughter. She deserves to know the truth. Asterisk there was another. Asterisk August 4th, 1998. I dream about her every night. You said you'd tell her when she was older. How old is she now? 12. Does she still like painting? Please, Mary, don't make her hate me for something I didn't do. Asterisk by the third letter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read. He'd written every year. 1999, 2001, 2003, until the last one, dated 2007, the year my mother had her first stroke. That one was different. The handwriting had changed, rougher, almost unreadable. They're moving me. Somewhere outside the city. I don't know why you stopped answering, but I forgive you. Tell Emma I never left. Tell her I kept my promise. I pressed the paper to my chest and sobbed for the first time in years. The kind of sob that comes from the bottom of the lungs, from a place you forgot existed. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had been trying to reach me. My mother, the woman I had spent my life trying to please, had kept every single letter, locked away. The truth hit me like a slow, cruel storm. She hadn't protected me. She had erased him. When I finally stopped crying, it was almost midnight. The house creaked with the sound of rainwater dripping from the gutters. I walked to the mirror and barely recognized myself, pale, hollow-eyed, like the reflection of a stranger who had lived a life built on someone else's story. For the next few days, I couldn't think of anything else. I called Riverside Memorial, pretending to be a researcher. They told me the facility had closed in 2012. The records had been transferred to the St. Helena Psychiatric Archive, 2 hours from where I lived. My hands shook as I wrote down the address. Psychiatric Archive. The words didn't make sense. Had my father been sick? Or had he been put away? I left that same evening. The highway stretched out in front of me, endless and black, the rain streaking across the windshield like tears I hadn't finished shedding. I drove with the letter on the seat beside me, my fingers brushing the edge every few miles as if to make sure it was still there, proof that the past hadn't just been a dream. When I reached St. Helena, the night air was thick with the smell of wet soil and pine. The building was massive, old, its windows like blind eyes. The security guard looked bored when I told him who I was looking for. "Records are by appointment," he said. "You'll have to come back Monday." I slipped him $100 bill. His tone changed instantly. He pointed me down a narrow hall, where the fluorescent lights flickered in rhythm with my heartbeat. The archive room smelled of dust and iron. Rows of file boxes lined the shelves, each labeled with numbers that meant nothing to me. I searched through the W's until I found it. Whitmore, David. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside were medical reports, photographs, and a small cassette tape labeled Session 9, March 1997. I didn't have a player, so I asked the guard. He shrugged, found one in a lost and found box, and left me alone in the room. The tape clicked, and then a voice, soft, hesitant, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. "My name is David Whitmore. I'm here because my wife believes I'm dangerous. But I'm not. I just know things I'm not supposed to know. My blood ran cold." I turned the volume up. They told me I'm paranoid, that the accident wasn't real. But I remember the lake, the fire, the night she came home covered in blood. They said she saved me. She didn't. She saved herself. The tape hissed for a moment. My breath caught. "If Emma ever finds this, tell her to look under the house. Everything she needs to know is buried there." I stopped the tape. The silence after his voice was deafening. Under the house. I looked out the window toward the dark silhouette of my mother's old home, the same one I had come to empty. Something inside me, fear, rage, love, twisted into a single, unstoppable thought: I have to know. I didn't sleep that night. The words from the tape kept echoing inside my head, circling over and over until they didn't sound like words anymore, just sounds. Under the house, under the house. I drove back before dawn, the road empty, mist curling around the fields like ghosts that didn't want to be seen. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. By the time I pulled into the old driveway, the sun was just beginning to rise, and the house stood there quiet, indifferent, like it knew I was coming back for something it didn't want me to find. I walked around to the back, my boots sinking into the wet soil. The grass hadn't been cut in years. The wooden porch creaked under my weight as I knelt and ran my hand along the boards. The smell of damp earth rose up as I pried one loose. Beneath it, darkness, soil, nothing at first. But then I saw it, a small patch of disturbed dirt, compact but uneven, like someone had buried something a long time ago. I went to the shed for a shovel. It was still there, covered in dust and spiderwebs, the handle splintered near the end, the same one my father used to use when he planted the apple tree in the yard. My throat tightened. I dug slowly, each motion heavy, the wood of the shovel biting into my palms. The deeper I went, the colder the ground became, until finally the metal struck something solid. It wasn't a box. It was a small metal chest, rusted and dented, the kind you'd use to store important documents or jewelry. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled it free, wiped the dirt off with my sleeve, and carried it inside. The house felt different now, alive somehow, watching me. I sat on the kitchen floor, my knees shaking, and tried the latch. It was locked. I searched the drawers until I found a hammer and forced it open. The lid gave way with a sharp crack, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, and a folder thick with papers. I picked one at random. It was a police report, dated June 2nd, 1996, the day before my father disappeared. Subject: fire at Blackridge Lake Cottage. Victim: unidentified male. The description was brief, the conclusion inconclusive. No body recovered. I flipped to the next page. It was my mother's witness statement. My husband went out that night after an argument. I tried to stop him. There was an explosion near the lake. I thought he'd died, but there was something else attached, a photo taken at the scene. The burned remains of a car, my father's car, and something else in the corner of the image, a second set of footprints leading away from the wreck, smaller, barefoot. My pulse quickened. I went through the rest of the box, my hands shaking, more photos. Letters between my mother and a man named Dr. S. Caldwell, a psychiatrist from Riverside Memorial. One line jumped out at me from the top of a letter dated July 1996. Mary, if you want this to stay off the record, I'll need your continued cooperation. You know what I mean. My stomach turned. There was money involved, transfers, signed receipts. She'd paid him thousands. And then, near the bottom of the box, I found something that made me drop everything. A cassette tape, labeled only, Session 10, private copy. My hands were cold as I slid it into the same player I'd borrowed from the archive. Static filled the room, then a familiar voice, my mother's. David doesn't remember what happened that night. He believes I set the fire, but he's confused. He's unstable, the doctor's voice followed, calm, professional. Do you want him committed? A pause. Then her voice again, softer, breaking, yes. He'll destroy everything if he remembers. The tape stopped there. I sat frozen, staring at the player as if it might start again on its own. My mother had had him committed. She hadn't been protecting me, she'd been silencing him. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, and then, like something in me snapped, I threw the player across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, but the sound barely registered. I pressed my palms against my face and screamed, my voice raw and broken, until it turned into a whisper. Why, Mom? Why did you do this to him? To me, the morning light poured in through the window, soft and golden, completely at odds with the storm inside me. I thought about the years I'd spent hating him, the nights I'd cried believing he'd abandoned us, the way I'd built my entire life around escaping the pain she'd planted in me. And all along, he'd been a prisoner, buried alive under her lies. For a long time, I didn't move. The house was quiet again, except for the faint creak of the porch in the wind. I felt hollow, like the truth had burned through everything I was. But beneath the grief, beneath the fury, a strange calm settled in. Because now I knew. And once you know the truth, there's no going back. I looked down at the papers, at the faint ink of my mother's handwriting across the years, and whispered to the empty room, "You didn't win, Mom." I found him. Then, from under the pile of documents, something else caught my eye, a small envelope, unsealed, addressed in my father's handwriting. "For Emma, if you ever find this," my breath caught. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I held the envelope as if it might vanish if I blinked too long. The paper was brittle, yellowed at the edges, faintly smelling of mold and smoke. My name was written in his hand, not rushed, not uncertain, but deliberate. As if he'd written it over and over until it looked perfect. For Emma, 2 words that made my chest ache. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of secrets. By the shattered cassette player, and the open chest, and the photographs spread across the floor like evidence from a crime scene no one had ever solved. Outside, the rain had stopped. The silence that followed was so deep it felt alive. When I finally tore the envelope open, a small photograph slipped out first. It was of me, maybe 6 years old, sitting on his shoulders by the lake. My hair was wild, my smile missing to front teeth, and he was looking up at me with that same expression I remembered, pure, uncomplicated love. My throat closed. I pressed the photo to my lips before I unfolded the letter. "My little girl," it began. "If you're reading this, I suppose I've lost the battle. Maybe I never had a chance. But I need you to know the truth before the world buries it with me." I could almost hear his voice, calm, gentle, that quiet warmth that used to fill every corner of the house. The night at the lake wasn't an accident. Your mother came for me because she found out I'd discovered what she'd done. There was money missing, Emma. A lot of it. She said it was for your future, but it wasn't. She was desperate. Someone found out, and she thought if she silenced me, it would all go away. My hands trembled as I read. When the fire started, she pulled me from the car and told the police she'd saved me. But the truth is, she set it. She needed me unstable, discredited. The doctor helped her make it official. False records, medication, a hospital room that became my prison. And I stayed there, waiting, hoping one day you'd come. There was a pause in the letter, a few drops of ink that had bled into the page, maybe from tears, maybe from rain. You were my light, Emma. Every day I heard your laughter in my head. It's what kept me alive when they said I was mad. I never stopped believing that you'd find the truth, that you'd see me for who I really was. I couldn't read anymore. My eyes blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest, the words soaking into my skin like something sacred. I wanted to scream, to tear the world apart, to go back in time and tell that little girl by the lake that her father hadn't left, that he'd loved her enough to risk everything. But the world doesn't give second chances. It only gives discoveries too late to heal what they broke. I read the last paragraph through tears. If I'm gone, go to the lake, Emma. There's something beneath the old dock, something that belongs to you. You'll know it when you see it, the lake. The same lake in the photograph. The same place he'd been accused of dying. By the time I folded the letter, I already knew what I had to do. I packed it, along with the photo and the box of documents, into a canvas bag. I didn't care about the house anymore, the walls, the furniture, the ghosts. They could keep it all. What I wanted was truth, and maybe, if I was lucky, peace. The drive to Blackridge Lake was long, winding through the valley where the fog rolled low over the fields like smoke. I hadn't been there since I was a child. The road was narrower than I remembered, the trees taller, the world quieter. Every curve felt like driving deeper into someone else's memory. When I finally reached the lake, the air was heavy with the scent of pine and rain-soaked soil. The water was still, black as glass. The dock was still there, crooked, half-collapsed, its boards slick with moss. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind, feeling the cold seep through my jacket. Then I saw it, the faint outline of something beneath the dock, half buried in mud. I knelt, my jeans soaking through, and reached down. My fingers hit metal. I pulled hard until a small box came free, a waterproof container, old but intact. I pried it open with a rock. Inside were 3 things: a locket, a folded sheet of paper, and a small tape recorder wrapped in plastic. The locket was gold, heart-shaped, with my initials engraved on the back. Inside, a picture of my parents on their wedding day, smiling like they had no idea how cruel life would become. The paper was short, just 1 line, written in his hand. The truth will set you free, but it will also break you first. My breath shook as I unwrapped the tape recorder. The battery was corroded, but the tape inside was labeled, "For Emma, last message." I sat there, the cold biting through my skin, the wind rising over the water, and stared at it. My thumb hovered over the play button. My father's voice, trapped in time, waiting for me to finally listen. The sun was setting, painting the lake in firelight. The same kind of light, maybe, that had burned here almost 30 years ago. I closed my eyes, pressed play, and held my breath, static. Then his voice. "Emma, if you found this, it means I'm gone. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. But you have to understand, the truth about what happened to me isn't just about your mother. It's about you." My heart stopped. They said I was delusional, but I know what I saw that night. You were there, Emma. You just don't remember. The tape crackled. My fingers went numb. You were in the car. I froze, staring at the dark water below me as his voice faded into the hiss of the tape. And for the first time, I realized I might not have been just the victim of her lie. Maybe I was part of it. The sound of the tape hissed in my ears long after his voice faded. The wind picked up across the lake, turning the water into ripples that caught the dying light and threw it back at me like shards of glass. I sat there, unable to move, the recorder heavy in my hands, the words echoing in my head, "You were in the car." It didn't make sense. I had been 9 years old that summer. I remembered my mother shouting that night, the smell of gasoline on her hands, the sound of a door slamming. But I didn't remember being in the car. My childhood memories had always ended there, at the door, at the shouting. Everything after that was blank. The human mind is strange. It hides what it can't bear to hold. I played the tape again, desperate to hear more, but it cut off right after that line, the sound warping into static, then silence. I slammed my thumb against the button, nothing. The battery was dying. Maybe that was all he'd said, or maybe the rest was lost to time. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the lake grow darker, trying to pull fragments out of my memory like threads from a tangled web. A flicker here, a smell there. My mother's perfume, the glow of fire on the water. My father's voice shouting my name. Then something surfaced, faint but real. The sound of my mother crying, saying over and over, "It was an accident, it was an accident," and my own voice, smaller, trembling, "I didn't mean to, Mommy." The world tilted. I stood too fast and nearly fell. The air felt thinner. The wind roared through the trees as if the forest itself was whispering the truth I'd buried. I staggered back to the car and sat behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. Could I have done something? Could I have caused it? I drove home in silence. Every bump in the road felt like a heartbeat, every shadow like a memory trying to crawl back into the light. By the time I reached the house, the night was thick, the moon hidden behind clouds. Inside, the air was colder than before. The house seemed to breathe, wood creaking, walls sighing, the clock ticking louder than it had any right to. I left the tape recorder on the table and stared at it like it might come alive again. I wanted it to explain everything, to tell me I was wrong, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't. I poured a glass of water, my hands shaking, and went to the living room where my mother used to sit every night with her knitting and her endless silence. On the mantel, her photograph stared back at me, calm, composed, untouchable. "You lied to me," I said out loud. My voice cracked. "You destroyed him. You destroyed me." For a moment, I thought I saw her expression change. Just a trick of the light, but it made me step back. Have you ever uncovered a truth that changed everything? The kind that makes you question your whole past and everyone in it. That's what she's about to face. If you've ever been there, holding a truth too heavy to speak, tell me in the comments below. Your story matters too. And don't forget to hit like if this moment hit you, because what comes next will make you see her differently forever. And then something strange happened. As I turned away, a small thud echoed from upstairs. Then another. It wasn't the house settling. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Footsteps. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty. I took a deep breath and climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath my feet. The sound had come from the attic, the one my mother never let me enter as a child. My pulse pounded in my ears. The door was half open, a line of cold air seeping through the crack. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, old dust and something else, faintly metallic. The moonlight from the small round window illuminated boxes stacked neatly along the wall. And in the center, an old trunk. The lid was half open. Inside, I saw more papers and something that glinted in the light. I knelt, heart racing. It was a small silver key on a string. Tied to it was a tag that read, "For when she's ready." I knew that handwriting. My mother's. I took the key and saw another envelope underneath, addressed to me. The handwriting was shaking, faint, like she'd written it near the end of her life. Emma, if you found this, then you know everything, or at least the parts I could never say out loud. I need you to listen before you judge me. What I did because I had to. My breath came shallow. The night at the lake wasn't meant to happen that way. You were in the car, Emma. You saw it all. You tried to stop him. He wanted to take you away from me, and you panicked. You turned the key. The fire caught before I could reach you. The room spun. You passed out. You don't remember because I made sure you wouldn't. The doctors helped me bury the truth to protect you. If they'd known what really happened, they would have taken you from me. I couldn't let that happen. So yes, I lied. I lied every day of my life to keep you safe. The paper slipped from my hands. She'd done it all, the silence, the manipulation, the deception, not just to hide her guilt, but to hide mine. My knees gave out, and I sat on the floor, shaking. The attic felt smaller now, the air thinner, the truth pressing down like the weight of the entire house. I thought of my father's voice, soft and patient even at the end, telling me he forgave her, telling me he forgave me. And suddenly I understood. He'd known. He'd always known. The letters weren't just a plea for justice, they were a way to make sure I'd remember, but only when I was strong enough to face it. I sat there for a long time, clutching both letters, his and hers, and cried the kind of tears that don't come from pain alone, but from release. From finally seeing everything. Then, through the quiet, I heard a faint creak below, the front door moving with the wind. Or maybe something else. I wiped my face, stood up, and looked out the attic window toward the lake in the distance. The world was utterly still, but in that silence, I felt them both, my parents still there somehow, caught between guilt and love, forgiveness and truth. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because now I knew that the past wasn't something to escape, it was something to finally understand. I took the letters downstairs and placed them side by side on the table, his truth and hers, to versions of the same story, both stained with love and mistakes. Then I whispered into the empty room, I forgive you, both of you, and I forgive myself. The house seemed to exhale, a soft groan through the beams as if it, too, had been holding its breath all these years. Outside morning came slowly, the kind of soft light that blurs the edges of everything it touches. I sat in the kitchen, both letters open on the table, the smell of coffee filling the air though I hadn't taken a sip. The sunlight crawled across the papers, illuminating each stroke of their handwriting. Hers, controlled and fragile, his, uneven but alive. For the first time, I didn't see them as mother and father, villains or victims. I saw two broken people who had spent their lives trying to protect me in the only ways they knew how. But forgiveness isn't simple. It isn't a moment, it's a weight you have to decide to carry differently. I looked around the house, every object a memory, the cracked ceramic bowl by the window, the faded curtains that still smelled faintly of her perfume, the piano in the corner missing two keys. Every piece of this place held the story of their love and their ruin, and mine. I took the letters and put them in the drawer where it had all begun, the one I'd once sworn to never open again. I didn't lock it this time. I just let it rest. Outside, the world was bright, almost too bright. The lake shimmered in the distance like glass, reflecting everything and nothing. I walked out barefoot, feeling the cold earth beneath my feet, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain and something new, renewal, maybe. When I reached the dock, I sat where I had found the box and looked out across the water. My reflection wavered, fractured by the ripples. I didn't recognize her, the woman staring back. She looked older than I remembered, but also lighter, like the truth had burned away the weight she'd been dragging through her life. For years, I'd lived inside someone else's story. I'd been the girl abandoned by her father, the daughter betrayed by her mother. But that morning, staring into the lake, I realized that wasn't who I was anymore. The story had changed. Or maybe I had finally stepped out of it. A soft breeze lifted my hair, and for a moment I could almost hear their voices, his gentle, hers careful, overlapping like to melodies that had always belonged to the same song. "I forgive you," I whispered again, this time not to them, but to myself. And for the first time, I meant it. I stayed there for hours, letting the water carry the silence, until I noticed something glinting between the boards of the dock, something I'd missed before. I leaned down and pried it loose. It was a thin gold chain, tangled and almost black with age. Attached to it was a tiny key, the same shape as the one I'd found in the attic, only smaller. My pulse quickened. I looked around, confused, until I realized what it matched. The locket. I opened it again, and this time, beneath the photo of my parents, I saw that the lining was loose, a false back. My fingers shook as I pried it open. Inside, folded so small it was almost invisible, was another note. It was my father's handwriting again. "If she ever tells you it was your fault, don't believe her. It wasn't. You were a child. You tried to save me. You turned the key because she screamed. It wasn't your doing, Emma, it was fate's. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember this, I forgave you before it happened." The words blurred. My chest tightened as I pressed the locket against my heart. It wasn't me. It had never been me. I broke into sobs so deep they shook my entire body, years of guilt I hadn't even known I was carrying spilling out all at once. The sound echoed across the lake, but I didn't care. I cried for him, for her, for the child I'd been, for the woman I'd become, for all the years stolen by lies, and for the truth that had finally found me. When the tears stopped, I felt empty, but in a good way, the kind of emptiness that comes after purging something toxic. I sat there until the sun was high, and when I finally stood, I knew what I needed to do. I went back inside, gathered the box, the letters, the photos, and the tape recorder, and carried them out to the lake. I placed them on the dock one by one, like offerings. The past had lived too long inside this house, this lake, this heart. It was time to let it rest. I struck a match. The flame caught easily. I watched as the papers curled, the ink dissolving into smoke that drifted upward, twisting and shimmering before disappearing into the blue. For the first time, I didn't feel loss. I felt release. As the fire burned, I whispered, "Goodbye," and maybe, just maybe, the wind whispered back. When the last ember faded, I picked up the locket, fastened it around my neck, and turned toward the path leading away from the lake. I didn't look back. The first light of dawn touched the lake, and the water shimmered gold. The road back to the city felt longer than I remembered, though maybe it was just because I was driving through memories instead of miles. The air changed as I left the forest, colder, denser, filled with the hum of something I'd almost forgotten, life moving on. The highway signs blurred past like fragments of a story I no longer belonged to. I hadn't been back in nearly 10 years. My apartment sat high above the river, tucked between buildings that seemed to have aged better than I had. When I unlocked the door, the stale scent of dust and paper greeted me like an old friend. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, the half-read books, the dying plant on the sill, the unopened letters from work. Time hadn't moved here. Only I had. I dropped my bag, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window. The city lights shimmered like fireflies caught in glass. Somewhere below, a siren wailed, sharp and distant. It felt strange to be surrounded by so much noise after the silence of the lake. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept looping back to his words, "I forgave you before it happened." They played over and over, like a heartbeat, until they no longer hurt. Instead, they began to feel like a rhythm guiding me toward something else, something unfinished. I opened my laptop, almost on instinct, and began to type. Not a story. Not at first. Just fragments, the letters, the attic, the lies, the forgiveness. My fingers trembled as they moved across the keys, but I didn't stop. The words came faster than I could control, confessions I'd never spoken aloud, truths that had been locked away like that drawer for decades. Hours passed. The city outside faded into dawn, the sky pale and soft. When I finally stopped, I realized I had written nearly 40 pages. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even coherent, but it was real. That's when I knew what I needed to do next. I emailed a small publishing house I'd worked with years ago, one that had once told me they believed in my voice even when I didn't. I didn't explain much, only wrote, "There's a story I need to tell. It's not fiction, and it's not forgiveness. It's something in between." I attached the document, hovered over send, and hesitated for a long moment. Then I clicked. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of being seen. Days passed without a reply. I told myself I didn't care, but every morning, I checked my inbox like a ritual. Then, one evening, as the rain streaked across my window, the email came. "Emma, we read it. And we think others need to read it too. Let's meet." My heart pounded. When I walked into their office 2 days later, I half expected to feel exposed, like I'd laid my soul bare for strangers to dissect. But the woman who greeted me, her name was Claire, looked at me with quiet understanding. "Your story," she said, "it doesn't read like a confession. It reads like survival. We talked for hours." She didn't ask about names or dates, only feelings, details, the truth between the lines. When I left, I felt lighter, almost untethered. Over the next months, the manuscript grew. We called it The Drawer. It wasn't about betrayal or forgiveness anymore. It was about what happens when the past stops haunting you and starts teaching you instead. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still hear my father's voice from the tape, not as a ghost, but as an echo of strength. And my mother's handwriting, once a wound, became something else, proof that even flawed love is still love. The book was published in the fall, quietly, without marketing or noise. But it spread, slowly, like fire through dry grass. Letters started arriving. People who had found their own drawers, stories of truth, forgiveness, loss, and the painful beauty of finding yourself in what you once tried to bury. One letter, though, stopped me cold. It came from a woman in Vermont. Her handwriting was elegant, familiar. "I think I knew your father. He spoke of you often, even when he couldn't say your name. If you ever want to know the rest, come find me." I folded the letter, heart racing. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but something else, hope. There was more. And I wasn't done yet. The train ride to Vermont felt like stepping into another life, one quieter, older, painted in shades of memory and mist. The world outside the window blurred into a watercolor of forests, snow-flecked fields, and rivers that looked frozen in time. I hadn't traveled that far north since I was a child. The air even smelled different, pine, wood smoke, and distance. The letter had no last name, just Marianne Brattleboro, but something about the handwriting had pulled at me like a thread tied to a place I didn't remember, but my heart did. When I arrived, the small town looked like something out of a dream, brick storefronts, flickering lampposts, and a bakery that filled the air with the scent of cinnamon. I walked to the address she had written at the bottom of the page, Maple Street, number 12. It was a 2-story house with blue shutters and a porch swing that creaked softly in the wind. I hesitated at the gate, the same way I had before opening the drawer. My fingers trembled, and for a moment I almost turned back. But something inside whispered, "You've come too far to stop now." When she opened the door, I froze. Marian was older than I'd imagined, silver hair neatly tied back, eyes a soft green that reminded me of the lake. But it wasn't just that. It was the way she looked at me, as if she already knew me. "Emma," she said, not asked. "You look just like him." The words hit like a shockwave. I didn't even have to ask who. She stepped aside gently, motioning for me to come in. The house was filled with photographs. On the walls, the shelves, even the piano in the corner. And there on the mantel was one that stopped me completely. My father, younger, smiling, holding a fishing rod by a lake I didn't recognize. Beside him, Marianne, her arm around his waist. My breath caught. You knew him, she nodded, eyes glistening. More than you know, we sat in her living room, the clock ticking softly between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice that trembled like something long held back, she began. I met your father after he left. He came here with nothing but an old car, a box of tapes, and guilt that could have drowned him. He never stopped talking about you. Said he'd ruined everything trying to protect the one thing that mattered most. I swallowed hard. Protect me from what? She hesitated. From the truth, mostly. From the way your mother had begun to unravel. She wasn't cruel, Emma, just lost. She loved him, but she couldn't stand what he became after the war. He wasn't the same man who left her. And when the drinking started, so did the lies. But when you were born, he tried to start over. She didn't believe him. She told him he wasn't fit to raise you. That's when he left. And that's when the letters began. The letters, I whispered. He kept writing her, Marianne nodded. Every year. Birthdays, holidays. He never stopped. She never answered. I looked down at my hands, the old ache returning, but this time softer. And you were you, she smiled sadly. The woman who tried to love a man who only belonged to his past. Silence filled the room again. A storm began outside, soft snow falling against the windows. She stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. He asked me to keep this, she said. Said one day, you might come looking for it. I took it with shaking hands. My name was written across it, Emma. The ink had faded, but the letters still felt alive. When I opened it, the first line nearly stopped my heart. If you're reading this, it means you found the drawer and the truth. I never meant to disappear. I only meant to give you back the life that was taken from us. He wrote about the night he left, about how he'd come back once, years later, but saw me asleep through the window and couldn't knock. How he'd stood there for hours, watching, whispering apologies that no one heard. I thought I was saving you from my mistakes. But I see now I was only saving myself from facing them at the bottom, one final line, underlined twice. Don't let our silence become your inheritance. Speak. Tell it all. My throat tightened. I pressed the letter to my chest. When I looked up, Marianne's eyes were full of tears. He wanted to make it right, she whispered. He just didn't know how. We sat there for a long time, two women connected by a man who had loved us both in different lifetimes. As I left, she held my hand and said, you remind me of him. Not the man who left, the one who always came back. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was quiet, covered in white, like a blank page waiting to be written. And for the first time, I understood exactly what he meant. The silence ends with me. Winter clung to everything that year. By the time I returned to the lake, the world had turned to glass, the water frozen, the trees bare, their branches etched against a pale sky. The house stood exactly as I'd left it, though something about it felt smaller, like the ghosts had finally loosened their grip. I parked the car, cut the engine, and sat there in the quiet. The letter from my father was folded in my coat pocket, worn soft from being read too many times. I could still feel his voice in the words, still hear the faint hum of his regret, his love, his warning, don't let our silence become your inheritance. It had taken me months to understand what that meant. To speak didn't just mean to write, it meant to live out loud, to stop hiding from the pain that shaped me. But I knew this story wasn't done. There was one more truth left here, buried beneath the snow. Inside, the air was colder than outside. The smell of dust and pine still lingered, faint but familiar. I lit the old fireplace and watched the flames twist to life, the same way they had the night I burned the letters. But this time, I wasn't here to destroy the past. I was here to face it. I climbed the stairs slowly, my steps echoing in the silence. The attic door creaked as I opened it, the cold rushing out like a sigh. Everything was still there, the boxes, the trunk, the faint outline where the drawer had once sat before I moved it downstairs. I don't know what made me do it, but I went to the far corner, the one I'd never really noticed before. The boards there looked newer, as if someone had replaced them long ago. I crouched down, ran my hand along the floor, and felt a hollow space beneath. My heart began to pound. I pried one of the planks loose, and there it was, another box. Smaller this time, wrapped in a faded scarf. Inside, beneath a thin layer of dust, was an old Super 8 film reel, a tape labeled Summer 1987, and a single photograph. The picture was of me, maybe 6 years old, sitting on the dock with my parents. My mother had her arm around me, her smile soft, her head leaning against his shoulder. It was the kind of image that didn't belong to the family I remembered, to peaceful, to whole. I stared at it for a long time before loading the reel into the projector that still sat by the wall. The machine coughed to life, the film stuttering against the light until the image appeared on the sheet I'd hung up years ago for painting. The footage was shaky but clear, laughter, wind, the glimmer of sunlight over the lake. My father behind the camera, my mother twirling in the grass, her dress catching the light. I was chasing a kite, shouting something that made them both laugh. Then the frame shifted, my father turned the camera on himself. He smiled, hesitant, as if unsure whether to speak. Then he did. "If she ever finds this," he said softly, looking straight into the lens, "tell her we tried. We really did." Life just turned on us faster than we could hold it together. He looked away, then back. "You deserved more than the silence we gave you, but maybe one day, when you're older, you'll come here. And if you do, don't remember the ending, remember this." He pointed the camera toward the lake, where the three of us stood, laughing, alive, unbroken. The reel ended with the sound of his voice, whispering something barely audible. She was always the reason. The projector clicked off. The attic fell silent except for the sound of my heartbeat. I sat there for a long time, tears running silently down my face, until the first light of dawn slipped through the cracks in the window. That morning, I walked to the dock. The lake was still frozen, but I could see my reflection again, not shattered this time, just suspended. I took the photograph and pressed it into the ice. "This is where it ends," I whispered. "And where it begins." As the sun rose higher, the surface began to glimmer. Tiny droplets formed, spreading like veins across the ice, as if the lake itself was waking up. Maybe we all were. I stayed until the water began to move beneath the melting crust, soft ripples forming where there had once been stillness. It felt like the lake was breathing again, like forgiveness, thawing after a long winter. When I turned back toward the house, I didn't feel haunted anymore. Just grateful, for the truth, for the pain, for the silence that finally broke. And as I reached the porch, I realized something simple, something I'd never understood until that moment. The past doesn't vanish when you forgive it. It just stops owning you. Spring arrived like a breath after drowning. By April, the lake was alive again, waves tapping against the dock, the trees dressed in green, and the air carrying that faint scent of wet earth and beginnings. The house, though still old and cracked in places, felt different now, warmer somehow, as if it had forgiven what it had held for too long. I stayed for weeks, fixing what I could. I repainted the window frames, scrubbed the floors, planted wild flowers where the weeds had taken over. Each nail I hammered, each board I replaced, felt like a quiet act of healing, a conversation with the ghosts that no longer frightened me. Sometimes I would sit on the porch in the evenings with the locket in my hand, the